What's going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks and Game Time. Patriots draft is in the books. We're kind of in the wake of it. We're starting to feel like, all right, how good was this draft? I don't know about you guys. I'm still feeling pretty good, riding that wave. And I brought on somebody today who was actually on site before the Patriots drafted, during and after, and got some really interesting insight into not only what was going on last weekend, but also some of the culture shifts and internal changes that are happening inside the Patriots building. So without further ado, NFL national reporter for NFL Network, Cameron Wolfe. Cam, how you doing? Especially coming off one of the busiest weeks of the year. You okay?
I'm good. It's all green grass in front of us. The good thing about the off season is the draft is actually the start. When the draft ends, it's kind of the start of our off season. And so I was like, hey, push past the draft, and then there's a lot in the future. Head free, a lot of golf for me, a lot of hanging out. I live in Florida, so hanging out by the water. But it's still great to unpack the draft because it's my other than the playoffs, it's probably my favorite football event because no matter what team you root for, there's so much hope, right? Like the playoffs is just the elite teams of that year. The Super Bowl is the two best teams. The draft, everybody has hope, right? In the draft, you can picture what your team looks like for the future and really get a vision of how you're trying to build. And a guy like me, I came up as a fan making my own mock drafts on paper as like a 7 or 8 year old kid, writing it down of and so like to me, this whole episode of doing it and getting paid for a job is still surreal. And so I always soak in this time and then always seeing 21, 22-year-old kids get to live their life dream. So this week was cool for me. And then I got to see kind of an inside look of the New England Patriots. I think for so long they've been this kind of, I don't know, the what do you call it, the evil empire from people outside of the building of like, you don't know what's going on, you just know they're really, really good at what they do, right? And Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, a dynasty, 6 titles, but that's all over. And so how do you move past that? What is the new identity? And you start with a new quarterback in Drake May. So learned a lot this week and wrote about it on NFL.com with a piece of kind of diving into some stories there and talked about it on TV. And we'll be covering it a bunch throughout the year and the years ahead of what the Gerard Mayo Patriots will look like.
Absolutely read that piece if you haven't already. We're going to touch on a lot of the points just to get your insight into that. But like you mentioned, you were on the ground. It's a time for hope and all that good stuff. So obviously we have to see what's going to happen with this organization. Things change. We'll see if the changes they're making are actually going to pay off. What was the vibe that you got before we get into the nitty-gritty of those changes? How did it feel kind of leading up to the draft? And then once they got Drake May, what were things like?
Yeah, it was jovial, honestly. Not a spirit, honestly, that I'm used to feeling when I get to the Foxborough, Boston area. Even when they've been winning, it's always been a business-like atmosphere. And I got happiness. I got joy. I got one of the first elements I got when I arrived to the facility on Wednesday was Gerard Mayo welcoming me into his office. I can guarantee you if Bill Belichick was here, I would not have been welcomed to sit in this office for, it ended up being 35, 40 minutes talking ball. And Bill Belichick doesn't have anything against me. That's just not his way. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just a different way of being. And so it's funny. I had a bunch of my colleagues joke with me when they learned I had this assignment. It was like, good luck of like, it's going to be, a difficult storm. And, credit to the Patriots. They're doing things their way. Gerard's doing things his way. Elliott's doing things his way. And they're willing to do things differently. And Gerard welcomed me in. Stacey James was okay with it, and kind of set everything. And so like all of those things kind of set and shifted my expectation from that Wednesday of like, hey, this may be a difficult challenge to try to work with this team to, hey, this is really the New England Patriots. And so I'd say that was my first vibe, just kind of seeing just kind of the reaction on people's faces around the building. I was walking through the facility and you see different coaches. I ran into Matthew Slater, who's now working with Gerard Mayo. And, you just kind of get a different energy. You get a different vibe. And, the reality is they have not lost any games yet. They are 0-0. It's a rebuilding team, and the butterflies and sunshines and rainbows, all of that sounds good in April when you haven't lost any games in May at this point. But you got to see how things hit when they actually hit. But I thought this team had already started to show ways they were different. I talked with Gerard Mayo in his office, and one of the first things he told me was, "Hey, if Bill Belichick was here, we'd probably trade back." But we still believe in trading back, but we very much believe at 3 we have to get a cornerstone player. And I had a pretty strong idea. We're not allowed to tip picks at NFL Network, but I had a pretty strong idea, and I tried to make it as clear as possible in my reporting that Drake May was the guy, unless you got that Godfather offer. But even something as simple as those two elements, the fact that Gerard, a lot of different elements as he's starting, the fact that they're open to staying at 3 instead of trading back, the fact that they're willing to change their draft philosophy, their draft grading system, which we'll talk about a little later with Elliott Wolf and how they go about things. Like, these are things of like, hey, I know we have done things a certain way and we've been very good at it, but as a new person in charge, and I am not going to just try to replicate what Bill Belichick did. That's just not, no matter if Gerard came up under him, no matter the fact that Elliott spent the last 4 years there, they're their own men. And for better or for worse, you're going to get the Mayo, Wolf, May Patriots, not just the off branch of the Bill Belichick Patriots.
One, I'm glad it was a pleasant surprise. Your trip went a little better than you expected,
Yeah.
more open. And like you
And
mentioned,
the weather was great too. I told you, I'm a Florida guy. I'm not going to lie. I heard it was a lot of rain. And the first day I showed up, sunshine, not a cloud in the sky. And I'm like, this must be a sign. This must be a sign.
I think you brought it with you. I think you're
Yeah.
being a little too modest there. You helped
I'll
us
take
out
it.
a little bit because it's been up and down. So thank you for that. But like you mentioned, they're not trying to replicate what Belichick did. And there's been some times this offseason where, Gerard and Elliott, they kind of got themselves in trouble, right or wrong, for kind of trying to separate themselves and be like, no, we are doing our own thing. But at the same time, they both have acknowledged that they do respect the things that Bill Belichick did. And multiple times this offseason, you've heard Gerard Mayo show reverence for Bill Belichick in all the different ways that he influenced him. So actually, you mentioned the draft. We'll go with that. I am curious, in what ways from what you saw are things different and also the same in the draft philosophy? I feel like you said, the fact they stuck and took Drake May, like from watching all the past quarterback drafts and or Patriots drafts, I was very worried that they were going to go back and get JJ McCarthy, who I had nothing against him, but I'm like, hey, man, you're going up against some of the best quarterbacks in football in the AFC. You need someone like Drake May who can physically keep you in games, and then you rise him up to the mental capacity where he can be more competitive. So what did you see in terms of that difference from the front office and the way they did things last weekend?
Yeah, I actually start with Elliott Wolf because the reality of the Bill Belichick era was, even when it was great, even when it was bad, you get Bill Belichick as both the coach and the general manager. And so you get him as the end all be all. In this current regime, it's Gerard Mayo and Elliott Wolf as completely separate men. Elliott Wolf's having full control, but Elliott Wolf, even though he spent the last 4 years for the Patriots, has largely been a Green Bay Packer for most of his career. So this isn't a guy who built himself and his principles up in New England like most of the people in New England. They've had a lot of we promote internally, and so everyone who had got to the top had always learned a certain way. Elliott's learned a different way, and I learned in the process. One of the first things he did in this draft process is to change the grading system. Just kind of make it as simple as I can for folks. The Patriots fit-based system as far as their draft board. And what I mean by that is they will only have people on their board who they feel like they can fit in this particular role within their offense, within their defense, that fits a certain type of player they are trying to look at. And so it didn't allow for maybe those outliers who were just incredible talents, but didn't necessarily fit into your 3-4 defensive end position or this type thing, right? And so I think the first thing he did is change that to a value-based system instead of a fit-based system, and say, hey, fit matters, but at a certain point, the value becomes too great to worry about the fit. And it's like, hey, if this is a top 10 player on our board, but he's not a great fit, if he's there at 25, then all of a sudden we start thinking, okay, maybe it becomes more worth that chance, and we'll figure out how to get him into our system. I think that's something that more teams than not use. And I think that's something that Elliott Wolf got from Green Bay, and he's using that style along with Alonzo Highsmith, who came over and has a big role. And changing your grading system within one offseason is a difficult challenge, but it seems like they were all in on doing that path. And so their draft board, I was told, was about 200 players. A lot of times the Patriots under Belichick would have a 125, sometimes less player draft board. And so you're just looking at a smaller group of pool of players to pick from. And then that often is why you get some of those picks where people were like, why are we getting a third round guy in the first round? Well, if you only got 10 first round players on your board and they all go off, then you're picking second and third round players in the 20s and 30s where the Patriots had long been picking. And so it doesn't mean that it's the right way versus the wrong way, but I think that's just a huge change that we saw within this draft. And so you see guys, the Drake May pick, just start with that. Like, Mayo told me he thought they would trade back in that situation. And you heard, for some of you guys listen, Bill Belichick kind of break down the pick and, talk about some of the things he felt like were issues with Drake May. And I think a long time in the Belichick era, it was like, hey, we want as many shots as we can get at players rather than, hey, let's maximize this one spot. And so if you're looking in the Bill era, you may be looking at a situation where they take that Giants offer, or maybe they take that Vikings offer and say, hey, we'll take our chances, whether it's JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix, so I also know they were high on. And we'll get the extra picks and we'll build that way. They felt the value for the quarterback and getting the right quarterback was more than enough to stay there. So I think that's a big principle there. Even something as small as for Elliott Wolf, and I don't know if you guys noticed this on draft weekend, but they showed a picture of the draft room. And the draft room had a lot of scouts and coaches in that area. The Patriots historically have had one of the smallest draft rooms as far as people inside there. Bill Belichick often invited just maybe the coordinator, the head coach, and the top scout executives. So you might have 10 or less people in your draft room. And here it was 30, 40 plus. He invited any coach, any scout who wanted to be in there in that room. And so I think it kind of creates an element where your scouts feel heard. You feel like you're a little bit more of a cohesive group, not just, hey, this is Bill's show and that's it. So I think there's just some things that I guess stood out for me in the early portions. And then the most obvious beyond Drake May, they took 5 straight offensive players. They put 7 of their first 8 players offensive. And this was not a big secret. Elliott Wolfe said all offseason, we're going to weaponize the offense. Gerard Mayo told me in the office before the draft, we're not picking a middle linebacker high in the draft. We're not picking a defensive tackle. We're not picking a corner. You got my head. We know what the issue is, and we're going to fix the issue. And I think a lot of times you saw in the Bill Belichick area, even when at the end, when the offense was the issue, defense was still in the forefront of building this team. I think Gerard Mayo is saying, hey, our defense is good right now. We got to fix the other side of the ball. And I think there was an intentionality of we're going to, no matter, I'm sure they're picking their board as true, but if everything's equal, we're going to pick the offensive player. And even if it's not equal but very close, we might still pick the offensive player because we know we got to get receiver. And we did get a receiver and multiple receivers. We know we got to get an offensive lineman. And they got multiple offensive linemen. I think it's just doubling down on your needs. And we'll see if the players work out. I guess it doesn't matter if they all bust. But right now, I think that they know what the issues are. They're attacking him intentionally. And they're surrounding their young quarterback with young offensive talent in a way they didn't do when Mike Jones was the first-round picker.
Like you said, I think the Patriots are really just living up to a lot of the things they've said this offseason where, like you mentioned, weaponizing the offense and kind of the aggressiveness towards that. The one thing I think Mayo said that got him in trouble was when he said, burn some cash.
Burn some cash, right.
He said, the upside the head was like, why would you say that? So, he's taking his lunch, but it is kind of cool to see, one, the transparency, but also that this group is really following through with what they said. They said, we're going to draft and develop. We're going to keep our guys that we feel are like conducive to what we're trying to do. And we've seen that happen, especially with the Barmore extension. Second biggest contract after Tom Brady. And you're seeing they really are paying the guys that they feel like are part of their long-term plans. Another thing, like you mentioned, the scouts actually being in the room, feeling heard. Gerard Mayo said he wanted to knock down walls. That was day one. He wanted people to feel more included. And speaking of those walls, it's not just philosophical changes that we're seeing inside Gillette. We're also seeing some changes in terms of the building, the things on the wall, what they're saying in addition to some philosophical changes. So what did you see actually in the building, and how are they kind of changing the message from the typical, do your job and all those type of mantras we saw with Bill Belichick?
Yeah, it's interesting because for some people this may be nothing, for some people it may be everything. But I thought it was noticeable. I got to walk through one Patriot place, saw some of the team meeting rooms, and saw the hallways. And one of the first things I noticed as I'm walking, I'm like, "There's no Patriot Way sign up. There's no Do Your Job sign on the door. Like, where did it go?" And I'm walking the halls with Robin Glazier, who is the advisor for Gerard Mayo, but also executive vice president on the football business side of things. And I know there's a lot of people trying to figure out what her role is, what she's doing. She's not making football decisions. Like, she didn't pick Drake May, but she's handling a lot of those business elements that honestly Gerard Mayo probably doesn't want to spend the time that it takes to allocate to. And so she's handling a lot of those administrative business elements and creative elements like the wall transformation. That's really, from what I understand, a passion of hers that she really wanted to put in fruition. And so taking some of the principles that Gerard wants his team to stand for and putting it on the wall himself, because and it's a delicate balance. And I think the Patriots are trying to deal with this all because it seems like everything that comes out is either a slight against Bill Belichick, attacking Bill Belichick, or this and that. And I think they're trying to figure out how we navigate away from such a big figure and create our own landscape. Like, this is Gerard's team. Like, Gerard has to build a culture. I've covered so many different coaching changes, and no matter what their style, the first thing almost every coach says, "Hey, we got to build our culture." And they all have different principles. They all have different sayings. To me, I'm not really worried as much about the sayings. I mentioned some of them in the story, like hard works, progress or process, progress, payoff is another one of them. That's the theme of the season. When we win, we win together. That's from Alex Van Pelt. These are things that are on the wall in the building, are going to be principles for them going forward. And these are, Gerard Mayo kind of principles, kind of the same way Bill had his as well. I'm not as much worried about the actual phrases as much as like Gerard saying, "I'm taking ownership of this team. I'm taking ownership of this building. This isn't just, hey, that's Bill's boy who's taken over after Bill lost some games." No, this is Gerard, the head coach of the Patriots. And although I learned a lot from Bill, and we're going to have some principles I'm sure I learned from Bill, I'm my own man. And a part of that is redoing some of that. And so I think the balance is, hey, we're not trying to disrespect Bill, but at the same time, Bill is gone. Bill's not going to help us win any games in 2024 or 2025. It's going to be how they move forward. And so they have a picture of Bill in the hallway with some notable scouts and executives and coaches who've been there. So they definitely want to make sure to give him his respect. But this is a Gerard Mayo envisioned building that Robin Glazier brought to life. And there's like a really cool mural on the back wall there. I talked about it a little bit in the story. The Patriots are going to do a little bit more in future and show that publicly. And so I don't want to spoil anything for people. So I just kind of give you a general idea, but it's really cool to see, especially like for me as a young Black guy, at Gerard Mayo as the first Black coach to ever be a part of this franchise in a city. Let's just keep it real, who has some people have questions of outside of the city of how they accept Black folk. And so I think that that's something that some people are uncomfortable talking about. But when you have a Black head coach, I think his identity and what he stands for is going to be an important part of that, especially in a league that is primarily Black. And so the mural that I'm referring to in the story is a young Black kid looking at some Patriots legends, like 5 or 6 different Patriots legends, including a Gerard Mayo, and sort of envisioning as time goes on what he could be. Maybe he could be a future Patriot. And so I thought it was just a cool, kind of art visual. And there's also an element that kind of has Patriots spelled out, where I have a few different descriptions of, hey, what do you think Patriots should stand for? And there's a few different sayings on there that kind of put into vision of like, hey, what do you think you as a Patriot should stand for? Like, as a New England Patriot, not as a United States Patriot, but you guys get what I'm saying. And so I think that that's such a it was just such an interesting like 30 minutes of my weekend, because I had a vision of what the Patriots had long been. And I think as I spent more time, it was rewriting kind of that vision. And I actually reached out to Devon Gottschall, who I've had a relationship with for a while, defense tackle there. And I just simply asked him, I'm like, hey, man, I know, it's only been a few months, but what do you think about, Gerard Mayo? Does it feel different? and he's like, oh man, he said Kraft, he's referring to Robert, not Jonathan. I know that's been a question here too. Robert Kraft made the best hire he could make in replacing Bill Belichick and Gerard Mayo. He was like, he is the right leader for us. And he was like, really, I have no other worries. We just have to get this offense right. He said the defense is going to be great, but if we get this offense right, I think we're going to be back in the playoffs sooner than later. And so like that to me, and this is a guy who, as a veteran, I know him very well. He's not going to BS me. And so I'm often curious what the player perspective is, because a lot of things for new head coaches can be done for the PR perspective to show the outside national media or the national public or even the local public, this is what we are. But behind the scenes, the players are not connecting it with it. And players understand, they feel fake. They feel where something is not authentic. Everything I've heard about Gerard has been extremely authentic. He is relatable. I have a quote in there where he talks about warmth before confidence, a phrase of his. I think he's used it publicly before, but he kind of went in depth with that. He's like, hey, this is not the old era that I grew up in, where you just tell players to do what they do. He's like, no, you have to build a relationship with them before you're tough with them. And he's like, I will coach out of love, and my staff will too. So he was very clear about how he wants to do things. It's no secret, Bill Belichick didn't roll that way. Bill Belichick, there's probably not a lot of, not saying he didn't love his players. I'm sure he did. You just probably didn't feel it on a day-to-day level, just the way he went about things. And that's fine. He won 6 championships that way. And so it was a winning way. It's just a different era. And I think that's something that Mayo really wanted to impact. And I think you're going to see a happier group, at least early on. Now, again, I will make this point again, because, again, it's May. October happens, you're 0-4. November happens, you're 1-7, or even October 2025 happens and you're still 1-5 after the losing season. Then I think things change in perspective. But I think for right now, vibes have been great, morale has been great, and it's been kind of eye-opening to me just seeing how everybody's adjusting to really this new normal.
And of course, like you said, losing can change things. And
yes,
being
absolutely.
Being a head coach isn't the same as being a position coach or a coordinator. They are very different roles where you have a different level of pressure. But I remember one thing last year when players were being asked, what do you think about Mayo as a potential head coach? So many players echoed that, especially on the defensive side of the ball, of course, that he was the reason, even though they were losing, even though things weren't going great, they wanted to come in for him because he brought a different energy. He kept guys alert, wanting to play hard, and also the different perspective he brought, where people were like, even in the game plans, he doesn't talk about football the way most coaches talk about football. He makes it more about life. It's more kind of philosophical, and just that different vantage point kind of makes it more interesting to listen to him. And obviously there's also the freshness of having, there's some new defensive coaches, but also on offense. Really, it's an overhaul. So really just hearing a different message will be interesting. But I love that at least Mayo does give that difference in personality and kind of perspective for his players.
Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to add there, like Gerard Mayo's 38 years old, a player who played 8 years in New England. Like, I think there's a lot of value. Not every coach has to be a former player, but I think there's a lot of value in him being not too removed from being a player himself. And so I think there's a certain connectivity there. But I will say this, because I had heard a little bit about this when I wrote the story, when I talked about it, because there's always a balance, right? Like you always think, hey, we had one style of coach. This always happens in coaching. You have one style of coach, you fire him, and then you try to take the exact opposite. Gerard Mayo is not the exact opposite of Bill Belichick. Gerard Mayo had a lot of Bill Belichick principles. Like, I think that he is going to be tough on guys. I think that he's going to yell at guys. I think he's going to have discipline as a core tenet in his scheme and his coaching. Like, I don't think you get this. Like, I will say this. I live in Miami, so I cover the Miami Dolphins a lot. I do not think that Gerard Mayo is a Mike McDaniel style coach, for better or for worse, right? I think Mike McDaniel is a great coach, but I think that what Mike McDaniel shows publicly is like this always happy, this always kind of players guy. And I think Gerard would be a player's coach, but I think as the year goes on, you'll see a little bit more of maybe, okay, that's the Bill in him. right there on that particular point, right? I think it'll come out. And so, although Gerard is very much his own man, I don't want people to get confused and say, "Oh, well, this guy's a former player. They're just going to run all over him. He's just, he's just here to be buddy buddy with the players." I think a lot of the reason why he's trusted is not just because players like him, it's because they feel like they can run behind him. They can, like, he leads in a way that they understand, but they also respect. And so I think that, like, the coaches, even coach I mentioned, like in Mike McDaniel, I think you'll see a lot more of these style coaches who realize the value of, as Mayo told me, like player mental health, building up confidence in a player. Like, you got a guy in Drake May who's 21 years old. You got to understand the importance of building up his confidence. He's a confident dude. If you heard him talk, he's a confident dude. He's been a competitor all his life. But it's tough if you throw him out there in the fire early in the season and he ends up getting sacked, throwing 4 interceptions in a game. How do you connect to him? I think that's going to be something that I think the new era has to recognize, because if a player doesn't receive a certain type of coaching well, he has a 4 interception game early in his career, you can break him just by how hard you are on him, telling him he stunk, why'd you make that decision, versus trying to build him up, trying to feel positives out of him. And I think that the caring about players, that element is going to help him in individual development. And I think that's something this team will need immensely. So you're going to be a young roster, a roster that's going to take time. How do you develop players as they go through adversity, they go through mistakes? And I think that's one thing that Gerard and he hopes his staff will be able to bring through, even as they go through maybe some struggles early in the process.
I mean, look no forward than the Mac Jones experiment.
Yep.
Where you had a guy who had lost all confidence because, one, the support around him was not there. You didn't draft to make him better. And then you also had reports that Bill Belichick wasn't talking to him. Like, right. That effect that has to have on a young quarterback. Like, Mac's still a 25-year-old guy. Like, as a person, he's still developing, and to not have support from someone who's so important, a guy that if you're in football, you probably looked up to at some point in your career. And every new guy that's come in for the Patriots has alluded to the fact that Mayo was formerly a player. And having that perspective of, like, Matt Light and Tom Brady would joke that he was Bill Jr. because whenever they were like, we don't want to be in pads or we don't want to practice today, they would send Gerard and he'd be like, hey, coach, we're not really about this. And knowing both sides, we're like, yeah, sometimes you have to be a disciplinarian. And to be great, you do need to get everything out of guys and really force them to kind of get out of their comfort zones. But also knowing, again, as a player, sometimes you got to back off. You need to know who you're talking to. You need to, and I think this is so important, prioritizing the player's mental health. These are something that some of these players may not even be thinking about, is what's going on inside my head? Like, why am I feeling this way? Why is this happening? And to say, no, we're going to prioritize that, to make sure that, one, that, like you said, we're invested in you as a human being. And then we also want to maximize you on the field, but that is secondary. So we got a lot more to talk about. We're going to get a little deeper into the draft, some great insights already. First, quick word from our friends at Prize Picks. Be right back.
Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks, as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball and hockey entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I personally love Prize Picks because they're super easy to use, easy to navigate, and they offer injury insurance, so your entries stay live even if one of your players gets injured. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
So like you mentioned, Drake May was someone the Patriots seemed really excited to actually be getting. So I'm curious, and what you were able to learn from your time there, one, why was Drake May the guy? I think we've heard some things from them, but obviously different perspective. And also another thing that they've talked about is not wanting too many guys in Drake May's ear. So from what you know, do you have an idea of who's actually going to be talking to Drake May and working with him? Because I know Alex Van Pelt, when he was in Cleveland, even though he's the offensive coordinator, he said, no, like, I have had a lot of success with quarterbacks. I will be involved. But you've also got TC McCartney and Ben McAdoo. So how's that going to work out?
Yeah, two good and separate topics. So I will say this. just let's keep it real. From what I understand, the Patriots would took whoever dropped to them out of the big three. Like, you can make it however. We fell in love with Drake May, and we made this to them. It wasn't really a choice. I know the JJ McCarthy stuff popped up late. From what I understood, he was never really a consideration to be taken over Drake May. JJ would have been an option if they did decide, hey, we want to take that Godfather trade offer and trade back to 6 or trade back to 11, then maybe we look at the J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix group. But they very much thought it was Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, whatever order you want. I don't know for sure if Drake May would have been the pick if, for whatever reason, Washington went J.J. McCarthy and shocked some folks. Like, that would have been an interesting debate. I do know, like Gerard Mayo liked Jaden Daniels a lot. He was very honest with me with that. Like, and I like Jaden Daniels a lot. I'm just gonna be honest. Like, I think Jaden Daniels is gonna be a star. Not saying Drake can't be that player. I think Jaden's a little bit more ready right now, and you'll see that more immediate. And so, if you're comparing, it may be something where, hey, Caleb and Jaden, at least in my view, are gonna go out to the early lead, and they're gonna look like I don't know if they have a CJ Stroud type year, but one of them may be CJ Stroud. And you're sitting there with your quarterback like, are you sure we got the right one? And wait 2 or 3 years. And I think Drake will be there with him, right? And so I think the thought for Drake, once they realized it was going to be Caleb at 1 and Jaden at 2, was that, hey, Drake can grow as we can grow. Like, I think Gerard and Elliott are very honest with themselves, which I think is good, that we are not a championship team. Like, I included this anecdote later in the story, and I for those of you who read the story, I understand if you didn't get to this part because it was a long story. It's like it was 3,000 plus word story I ended up with, but it was a cool anecdote. I feel like I wanted to put at the end. Gerard had told me that he had the conversation with KJ Osborne after they had got him, and he was essentially like, hey, I told him straight up, we're not Super Bowl or bust. Because you're here, we're not going to all of a sudden win a championship. Like, I'm not going to sell you this stuff that a lot of people sell people to get free agents there. It's going to be a journey, and really, we just want to be able to be really competitive, grow, and really play complementary football, and be able to make those hidden plays on special teams, the good plays on defense, and grow as an offense. And I think that's a realistic expectation for the Patriots. Like, I know people will do these shows in May, June, July and say, hey, what's considered a success for? I don't know if there's a win amount that you can put on that, right? This is a 4-13 team. I do not believe they're going to make the playoffs in 2024. I'm sorry, Patriots fans. I'm just going to keep it real. I don't care how good Drake is year one, and I do think that he will play and start at some point in year one. I don't think that he will be a redshirt player. I do not think this is a playoff team. I think they still have a lot of holes on this roster. I think that they filled some potentially in the draft, but it's going to take some time. And so Drake also is not a finished product as a player. Some of the questions about Drake were, hey, he's got sporadic accuracy. Sometimes when the pocket got a little bit messy, he moved out a little quickly. He may have missed some throws or missed some reads they thought that he should not have missed. And then you get to a situation where he's also a player where you haven't seen the fullness of a success that you've seen in a JJ winning the national title, a Jaden winning a Heisman Trophy. So, like, is he going to be able to be at the elite of the elite? Is he going to be able to tap into all those skill sets? We know he has a big arm. We know he's a really good athlete. We know that he can make every throw. Can he put it all together? I think those are all real questions for Drake that it's going to take time to be able to answer. He's only 21 years old. He's got tremendous upside, but as Mayo mentioned in the process, he's also got a floor. Like, this is not a can't miss prospect. He has bust potential for whatever that's worth. But you also got to take a chance. And we talked about this a little offline. Like, you're picking in the top 3, you're picking in the top 5. Yeah, you can say, hey, I'm going to hit a single for baseball term. I'm going to hit a single, or I'm going to hit a double where, hey, I know this guy's going to at least be a starter for 5 to 10 years, right? You could certainly draft it. And I think JJ probably falls in that category for me. I think JJ McCarthy is going to be a starter in this league for 10 years at least. Now, whether he's the 11th best quarterback in football, the 19th best quarterback in football. If he touches somewhere in the top 10, I don't know. But I think that's where his range is. Drake, if he hits his full potential, he could be a top 5 quarterback in 5 years, right? And I think that's why you're taking that swing. There's also a chance he doesn't work out. Just keep it honest. And you may be looking for another quarterback in 3 or 4 years, but you got to take that shot. And I think that's what they're doing here of saying he's got high end talent. And one thing that I think was not really portrayed a lot in the draft process that I learned a lot in the last week, and I try to share those stories on TV and in the story. He's a competitive beast, for lack of a better phrase. Like he's got some dog in him. You know, it's weird. You listen to him talk. He's a southern kid from North Carolina. He talks fast. He's just so jovial all over the place. My first thought is, man, this is an interesting fit for Boston. There's not a lot of in Boston that talk and move like like Drake May. But I think that you start to get into who he is, and you start to see this kind of that competitive nature, like something that's small. And I talked about this in the story and on TV. The night before the draft, he's playing 4-on-4 basketball in Detroit with his brothers. His dad's watching by pins and needles, hoping he doesn't get hurt. You got millions of dollars on the line, son. Why are you gonna risk breaking your ankle here with your brothers? And his brothers, it's funny, he calls himself the run of the family. He's 6'4", 6'5", but you look at his brothers, they're all 6'7", 6'8", 6'9". So he's the small guy who's been get beat up his whole life. And so that's his kind of roots. And so that was a cool kind of element for me, just kind of seeing that. And apparently Drake ended up killing it on the court that day, along with Luke May, who some of you guys will remember, he played for North Carolina, made the game-winning shot in the Elite Eight against Kentucky the year they won the title. He plays basketball professionally in Japan now. And so apparently him and Drake were going crazy. And it's funny, I had interviewed Drake on Friday, a little one-on-one off to the side, and I had some fun with him. I asked him his basketball comp. He said, I'm an off-brand Jason Tatum. And I hear a couple of his brothers just groaning off the side, like, oh, man, he's telling people he's Jason Tatum again. Like, they probably have heard it so many times. And they're like, come on, man. That's not your game. But, we always hype ourselves up a little bit more than what we are. But Drake can play some ball. Look at his high school tape. He can play some ball. But, yeah, I think that you got a guy who, and it was interesting because he used the comparison, and I think he was trying to be careful with this, but he used a Tom Brady reference, and mostly in reference of like, hey, the way he gets smacked on North Carolina, and I don't know if this is something that Drake loved to hear as something that sold his head coach, but he was telling me, he was like, hey, the way Drake was getting smacked, he was like, it was just him out there sometimes. They didn't have a lot of real players, and he was just getting smacked. And he would get right back up, wouldn't bother him one bit. And it looked just for a little bit, it looked like Tom Brady and the way he could take that punishment, just to take the punishment and get back up and do it again. And I could tell when Gerard was saying that, like it did something for him. Like he's a defensive guy. He wants to know if his quarterback is tough enough. And the toughness seems like it's not an issue. The competitiveness seems like it's not an issue. And then he's going to trust his coaches to be able to develop the other mechanics or whatever else it needs for him to become that player. I'll transition that to your second question, because I'm a little long-winded on this first part.
Good.
Keep an eye on Ben McAdoo. I'll just say this. I don't know how the whole flow is going to happen as far as like what the communication is in Drake helmet and all that stuff. I'm not going to BS you on that. I don't know how it's all going to fall out. But one thing I was told by Gerard and by multiple people, Ben McAdoo is going to have a huge role for Drake May. They hired him for a reason. They think that he's a quarterback savant. He's been a former head coach, and there's a thought there that he can develop Drake May. And so, not saying that he's going to have more role than Alex Van Pelt, but I'd say that Ben McAdoo is going to have a really significant role in developing Drake May. And I think you're going to really want to listen to, whenever Ben McAdoo gets a chance to talk to you guys, listen to whatever he feels like he's working on with Drake, because I think those are going to be principles that you see throughout the year, whether Drake started in week 1 or not. And so the last thing I'll say about the too many coaches in his ear, I thought it was a great point by Gerard and a good awareness, because last year this time I was with another team. I usually, just kind of perspective for me, they send me to a team every year for draft coverage. And it's usually they give me a choice or two between teams. For this year, I wanted to be in New England. I thought it was a very interesting story. And last year they had the first overall pick. They took Bryce Young. I did a lot of homework on that process. And I remember it was not brought up then, but they had so many different offensive coaches in mind. The thought there was, hey, we created this all-star coaching staff. They went and got Thomas Brown and Jim Caldwell and Josh McCown, and you have Frank Reich, all these guys who are offensive guys, and there's a few other guys in that building too, potentially working with Bryce Young. And by like week 3, I kept hearing that like there's so many voices in Bryce's head. He doesn't know what's going on. Like they're trying to tell Bryce this. They're trying to tell Bryce we're going to do more shotgun. Bryce, or we're going to do more under center. Bryce only wants to do shotgun. There's just so much going back and forth that like for a young guy, even somebody as smart as Bryce, because that was the thing with Bryce in the pre-draft process. They were like, hey, he can handle it all. He can handle a lot more than a typical rookie because of, you know, how he's come up and how he processes things. And I think because of that, they gave him way too much. Everybody wanted to be the guy like, hey, I'm going to give you this insight that makes you great. Or, hey, let me get this little footwork thing here. Or if you look at, and I think there needs to be a clear lineage, and there may already be internally. That's not something they have to share with us, but there needs to be a clear lineage of like, okay, who is responsible of talking to Bryce pre-snap? You only have a certain amount of time into the 15-second mark. How does it look like during game week? Is there a certain person that works with him during mechanics? Is it the same person that's working with him on his 15-yard intermediate routes and what he's seeing there? Is it the same person that's looking at film with him? Like you got a quarterback coach, you got a Ben McAdoo, and then you have Alex Van Pelt. 3 really main guys that I think will have the most hands on him. I'm not saying 3 is too many. I'm not saying it's not too many. I'm just saying there needs to be clear responsibilities there. And I think that's something that's going to be essential for Drake.
I agree that differentiation is important. One thing that's nice, last year with the coaching staff, I feel like one of the biggest issues, especially on offense, there were so many guys who didn't really have experience together. You had Bill O'Brien. Yep. Then he's got Adrian Clem. He's got Troy Brown. He's got Will Long, of course, he brought with him from Alabama. But these were guys he didn't really have experience with. And it started to sound like as the year went on, there was some difference in messaging and in communication. They weren't really on the same page. McAdoo and Van Pelt did work together in Green Bay. Then Van Pelt and T.C. McCartney worked together in Cleveland. So at least they can probably be given the same messages.
That's a really key point, Taylor, because just going back to Carolina briefly, all those coaches I mentioned, nearly none of them worked together. They were essentially creating remember when the Eagles had that dream team, quote unquote, roster? They brought Vince Young and all these different guys. Big name dudes didn't necessarily have the chemistry together, blow up by midseason on both the dream team and the Carolina Panthers. The fact that you having coaches who work together, a little bit less ego. Like the reality is we don't see it as much. Coaches have egos too. Every single coach, whether they say it or not, on that offensive staff wants to be attached to Drake May's development because if he makes it, they make it.
Yep.
Let's just call it what it is. If Drake May became a superstar, you know who's going to be a head coach in the next 5 years? Alex Van Pelt. Maybe Ben McAdoo. Maybe T.C. McCartney's an offensive coordinator. Let's just keep it real. Everybody wants to get promoted in their ranks, and so everybody wants to be attached to development. That's fine. This is not a negative. You just don't want it to be to the detriment of the kid where everybody is trying their best to have their stamp on him rather than saying, hey, what's the best thing for him? And so the fact that Mayo already knows that and he says we're on the same page. Now, you got to see it because saying you're on the same page and doing it is one thing. But I think that to me is one of the key elements for a young quarterback. Who is the guy? Like Houston did a really good job of it. And that Bobby Slowick and Gerard Johnson, those are his guys. Those are CJ's guys. And Gerard works pretty much exclusively with CJ as far as like footwork, mechanics, things in that respect. Bobby works with him with a lot of game plan elements, the scheme, how you're going to do things on the field. And they both come together with his film to make it together, a 2-man team. Like I said, I don't know if 3 is too many or just enough or too little. Like it's no right number, but the cohesiveness, I think, is a huge part. Like fit is such a huge part for coaching staff for quarterback success. So that's something that I love, we'll see how it works schedule wise for me, but I love to come back in training camp and get some more time with these guys on the offensive side and kind of see where they are with the Drake, and maybe if there's some roles that are more clearly defined by that point. And honestly, talking to Drake about what he gets, because the quarterback will tell you. The quarterback will tell you who he's getting more insight with. You'll hear it just in his phrasing. Like just pay attention to this, and we'll transition to the next topic from this. As you guys talk to Drake May in July and August, listen to his messaging and listen to like what it attached to wording wise. Obviously, you'll hear some things from Gerard in his messaging, but players repeat messaging for the coaches they are gathering the most from, they are taking the most information from. And so, like for example, I'll just use Miami from a perspective here because I spent a lot of time with them. Tua changed dramatically how he started to talk about his coaches when Mike McDaniel took over. And you start hearing him talk directly about Mike or Darrell Bevell, their quarterback coach, and how they're directly influencing something that he's putting into fruition, And so I think that's something you'll see with Drake. And my expectation is that you'll see a lot of mention of Alex Van Pelt and Ben McAdoo.
You mentioned the cohesiveness right before we move on. Like Gerard Mayo got some crap because he started the offseason program a week later than he was able to. And he said, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And I'm thinking, hey, if you're thinking long-term, I think a week, if you think that's what you need to make sure everyone's preaching the same message, that's hugely important. And you also hope that Alex Van Pelt, who's been referred to as a glue guy, like Aaron Rodgers, when he was fired from Green Bay, Rodgers was not happy. You hear that even with the Browns, not Kevin Stefanski, but other people on that staff, were not happy that he was fired. It was reported that it was because he wasn't developing Deshaun Watson well. People were saying, no, this was the glue guy on our staff. Stefanski's his own personality. He does his thing. Van Pelt was the one who kept people together. So you're hoping that translates in this new role with, again, reuniting with McAdoo and bringing TC McCartney. We're going to wrap the show up with some talk about some non-quarterback players, non-front office stuff. But first, quick word from our friends at Game Time. Be right back. With the NBA playoffs in full swing and the Celtics looking like the best team in the East, I'm trying to go to a game so I can witness their greatness in person. And to get those tickets, I'm going to be using Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Buying tickets on Game Time is extremely easy. All you have to do is click on the team that you want to see, browse through the available options, then click on those games. Then you can go through filters like price, where you want your seat to be, all that good stuff. Click, get a panoramic view of the seat that you're going to buy, and it can be as easy as a one-click purchase for your ticket. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. First, real quick, you've all been amazing in the chat. Really appreciate the love. Want to give a shout out to Mediman. Thank you so much. That means a lot. We're having fun, man. This has been a great chat. All right, so we will wrap it up with some talk about, again, non-quarterbacks, switch things up a little bit. So when it came to the first round, I think everybody understood the Patriots got really good value in Drake May. Fourth round, I even feel like it was understood Javon Baker was a great value. But then I feel like there was a little mixed opinions when it came to the middle of those. Like Jalen Pope, there were some rumors that the Patriots may wanted to trade up for Keon Coleman or Xavier Legette. He was my guy, but I'm glad he gets to stay close to home in Carolina. Then you also heard about Caden Wallace. People were saying, oh, he's kind of a reach left tackle. I understand it's kind of tough when a guy's switching positions. I personally thought, hey, he's the best tackle on the board. If you're confident, go get him. And then Layden Robinson. Now, I did hear that maybe they were connected to a receiver at that point and then got jumped, obviously, by the Broncos. They took Troy Franklin, but I think it was for the best because I loved Javon Baker. I'm all for it. But what were you hearing about kind of that middle part of the draft for the Patriots? Did it sound like maybe the initial plans they had were thwarted by the efforts of some other teams? And did they truly get their guys? Or like some people are kind of speculating that maybe they had some panic picks? That's not what I think, but I'm just opening the floor.
Yeah, I'll start with 34 because you kind of hit it on the nail there. It's funny. I reported a little bit of this before, but they tried to get into the back of that first round. They were trying, they made calls for a few different picks, and they thought they had something at 32 with the Bills. The Bills had just traded back with the Chiefs from 28 to 32. And they wanted to get to 32, and they had Xavier Legette and Keon Coleman graded pretty similarly on their board. I don't know exactly which one they would have taken if they got in 32, but those were their top two receivers on the board at that time, Keon Coleman and Xavier Legette. They wanted to get to 32. They knew the Panthers were very highly interested in Legette, and so they wanted to get there to get ahead of them so they can get their choice. And I guess my guess, like I said, I don't know for sure, but my guess is they would have taken Legette at 32. They would have taken Coleman if for some reason he wasn't there. Draft happens. And a little backstory here, because like the draft is funny, and this happens all the time. Like, you're just hearing a little bit of insight just kind of because I learned it. So don't take this as a slight against the Patriots. It happens to every team. They called up to the Bills, division rival. Let's keep it 100. It's not, you're not necessarily trying to help out your division rivals. I talked to someone with the Patriots who felt a little jaded because they thought that they had a sort of on paper or close to agreement with the Bills, and they believe that agreement was kind of shopped to the Panthers because the Panthers have a relationship with Dan Morgan, Brandon Beane. They have that bond, and it's honestly a lower drop for the Bills. They're not helping their division rival, so I get it. They're not helping their division rival, and they get to drop one spot and still get some value. So the Bills, who also needed a receiver, may have had their eyes on both of those same receivers and said, hey, we don't care, we'll get more value, and they traded back. But ultimately, they ended up not getting up there, being able to move, and so their top two, Coleman and Legette, both got picked there. And so you hear all the time, hey, we got the guy we wanted. He was going to be our pick no matter what. That wasn't the case here. The Patriots would have loved to have Keon Coleman or Xavier Legette. It did not work that way. Elliott Wolf did not panic there. Like, the easy pick would have been saying, okay, who's the next receiver on our board, which was Jalen Polk for them. Let's just go ahead, take him and keep it moving. For them, they ended up trading back 3 picks, getting that upgrade to the 4th round pick, and they ended up using that to get Javon Baker. And so it ended up being a little bit of a double dip. And so, there's a little bit more pick scenarios coming in it, but I think if you're a Patriots fan and you want to look at the positive, if you were a Xavier Legette fan like you, or if you're a Keon Coleman fan and you're like sad about that, or you're kind of lukewarm on Jalen Polk, look at it this way. They essentially double dipped, getting Jalen Polk and Javon Baker for what it would have cost to get an Xavier Legette or a Keon Coleman. And so as you track this for the years to come, it's going to be Jalen Polk and Javon Baker versus one of those two receivers. Is the combined effort of those two players more valuable for that? Now, as you get into the middle rounds, as you mentioned, they definitely were prioritizing offensive line. I think the fact that Baker was still available as a second receiver was like a pleasant surprise for them. I think they would have liked to get a second receiver, but after they took Polk, the priority was offensive line. And if you remember, I think the back end of the second round, there was a little bit of a run on tackles. I think the kid from BYU went. I think there was another kid that went at the bottom of that round. I think either to KC. I think KC got one, and then there was another team that got one. And there was another team that got one in the top of the 3rd round. I don't know which one, but I think at least one of those was going to be the target for the Patriots if he got there to 68. He didn't get there. They were talking about trading back because I think they understood the value for Caden Wallace may not have been an early 3rd. I think they might have been like, hey, if we could have got him in the middle of the 3rd or later in the 3rd, the value, quote unquote, might have been better. But if you watch guys who you had a little bit lower grade on than they went go at that stage at offensive tackle, and you got to say, we got him here at offensive tackle. We can play a game and say, hey, let's trade back 15 spots, and maybe he'll still be there. But what if he's not? And then we got to go to our next. And so we're just downgrading talent. So I think for them, that might have been one where, hey, they might have, quote unquote, reached, maybe a grade higher, around or higher than maybe they would have normally picked him. But he was a guy that was rising a lot in the draft process. I think early on, I thought a scout told me he was going to be more of a 5th, 6th round pick as he went through the draft process. I think most people thought he was going to be an early day 3 or even sneaking into the back of day 2. and the third round pick. And so this wasn't like this is a 5th or 6th round pick at that stage. They took him in the 3rd round. He's probably going to be a late 3rd round, early 4th round pick on most people's boards. And all you need is one team to say, hey, I'm going to take him early in 3rd round for you not to get him. So I think that's the thing there. Same thing with Layden Robinson. I think it's another player where he might have been able to get him a half a round, maybe a round later. But I think they just thought the value there for getting an offensive lineman was too good for them, or the fact they can get an offensive lineman they like was too good to kind of play that game and pass back. Like the theme of playing the game and trading back, I think, was a common theme for the Patriots. I mentioned in an article, Gerard Mayo had even said it there when it came to Drake May. He was like, I don't want to play this game where we just trade back 3 picks just to get more picks, but we miss our player, right? And so I think the big thought there was, if we like a guy, although we want more picks, and they did get more picks in the one trade back, we got to get core guys. We need talent. We need talent. Like, yes, we need bodies, but we also need talent. And if the difference is, hey, 2 C players versus a B player, we're going to take the B player most times. It didn't work for the first trade up into the 1st round because they were trying to do that and say, hey, we're going to sacrifice a pick to get a guy we think is just a hint better than what we see in Polk. But they pivoted and did the 2-for-1 route there. The rest of the draft, I think we saw them say, hey, if we like a guy, we're going to take them. And maybe it's a reach, but I think we like the player. And so I think that's what happened with the 2 offensive linemen there. And I think the fact that you see a Caden Wallace, who they think can play left tackle, we're going to see. I think most people I talked to thought he was going to be more of a guard or a right tackle. But, you know, you look at a team that's going to be playing a lot more outside zone. You don't need your offensive lineman to be this big burly dude. You need them to be able to move, and Caden Wallace can move.
What you detailed is why it's so tough to really analyze and grade these drafts, because you really don't know. Even when it's reported, it adds context, but you don't know. Like, the Patriots got criticized. They weren't being aggressive enough. Well, they were being aggressive. They tried to get a guy. Then it didn't work out. And then there's also the fact that sometimes you do have to play the game. And if you like a guy, you have to stay put. And you can get the criticism from all us outsiders and say, oh, you could have got him, you know, like you said, a half round later. Well, if he's not there, then
what if he's not? Right. Right. And you're going to go to the press conference and be like, well, I know why y'all keep trading back? Why did y'all keep? Well, we thought a guy was going to be there. He wasn't there. And then our next guy wasn't there. And all of a sudden you got all these 5th or 6th round picks in a draft where, honestly, it's not a great draft to have a bunch of 5th or 6th round picks. I talked to a lot of teams, and I think it was reported a lot publicly on the draft broadcast too, because 58 underclassmen, usually that number is closer to 150. A lot of NIL guys came back to school, and so you're losing a round or 2 of draft talent. And so a lot of the guys that won the 6th or 7th round were probably going to be UDFAs if it was a normal draft class. And so I think somewhere around the end of the 4th round, early portions of 5th round, you saw a huge drop off in talent. And so I think really that's where you saw teams say, okay, it's not worth trading back at some point. Or if we're going to trade back at this stage, we're just going to get next year's picks instead of just getting more picks in 2024.
And if you're a Patriots fan, I think you could probably sleep better at night knowing your team had conviction and took a guy they liked versus, like you said, trading back, probably missing on a guy. And then it's like, oh, look at all these picks with players that, you know, at this stage might not even make our roster or give us the same level of talent. I'm going to close on a bit of a fun question.
Yeah.
Joe Milton said there's no shot that he's not
Bazooka
playing
Joe.
Bazooka Joe. Now, I love the talent. He's an exciting player. And I think Alex Van Pelt, with his creativity, is going to maximize what he can do. At the same time, I think we have to be honest. Based on what we saw, there are a lot of things missing from a real quarterback perspective. Now, again, he said he was going to play quarterback. Gerard Mayo said he was drafted as a quarterback, but did not close the door to a position change. So last thing, do you think that Joe Milton will be a quarterback for the foreseeable future? Or do you think at some point, maybe if there's not enough reps in camp, or he doesn't really show them what they want to see early on, that we could see him maybe try out in different positions, which I do want to underline is not easy. People train their entire lives to be tight ends and don't make it. It's like, I want that to be very clear. But at the same time, if you want to make it in the NFL, sometimes you do have to see if you have capabilities in other spots.
Yeah, I think he's a quarterback, and I think they're going to let him try to be a quarterback. I think that's until proven otherwise, I think that's what you'll see him be. Now, it wouldn't surprise me at some point, and I'm not saying it in year 1. I'm saying at some point, if he learns the offense if you realize his skill set is just too good for him to sit on the bench. If he ends up getting a package of some sort where he's playing a little bit more of a hybrid role, not that he changes positions, but for lack of a better phrase, because he's the most popular one, a Taysom Hill type phrase. It doesn't have to be the same, but another player who can add a dynamic. And even more significantly for you, you got an athletic quarterback in Drake May, but he's not a type of guy you're probably going to want to be running a QB power on 3rd and 3 on a regular basis. Maybe that's a situation where, hey, Joe's coming in and Joe's got a lot of we always talk about his arm, but Joe's a really athletic runner as well. And so maybe that's something you utilize that for. I heard some people talk about Hail Marys. Drake May's got to be a pretty big arm too. I don't think he's going to want to come off the field on the Hail Marys once he's on the field either. But, obviously he's got that capability too. The reality is they got him as a 6th round pick. And again, I told you 6th and 7th round picks probably would have been undrafted in most drafts. Maybe somebody takes a shot on Joe because of the upside. But I think right now he's a very much a developmental prospect, a 3rd quarterback, a guy where, his goal right now should be focusing on making the team and learning rather than figuring out what his role is. And so I think year 1, year 2, as you see time go on, maybe he gets to a point where he can earn that backup job full right. And the other thing about that is he gives you a scout team look every week for a big arm athletic quarterback. And so certain things like this are valuable that I don't think a lot of people look at. I don't know if Joe's ever going to be a starting quarterback in this league. He's got some accuracy issues for sure. Sorry. Kind of a side story here. Random fact about me. I grew up a Tennessee Vols fan. Before I went to Houston Cougars, I went to University of Houston. And so I'm a big Coug. And so I root for my Cougs. For sure. Okay. But I don't know how, but since 7 years old, I've been a Vols fan. So I've watched the reason why this is significant. I've watched pretty much every game and throw that Joe Milton's ever thrown just as a fan. Like I watched Tennessee ball. And so I know his game pretty well, what he can and can't do. There was a lot of hope for him coming after Henry Hooker this past year. He wasn't quite that accuracy passer. And I don't know if he ever is that player. But I think that you try to develop him, you utilize what he can do well. And I think the goal to me for him as a 6th round pick, if he can end up being a long-term backup for Drake May, then I think you got a great value out of that pick.
Okay. This has been a ton of fun, man. I already got you for an hour, so I want to give you the rest of your night. Before I let you go, please just let the people know where they can find you and what great stuff you got coming down the pipeline that we should be looking out for. And, of course, plug the piece you already had, which was fantastic, a great read if you haven't checked it out yet.
Yeah, appreciate you, Taylor. I told you when I saw you at Foxborough, man, I make time for you. I'm sure all your fans know you're great at what you do. I followed you on social for a while. Get a lot of insight about, your breakdowns of where the Pats are. And, I think that stuff has value for me, especially another young brother in here. I want to see you succeed. And so I don't give an hour of my time post-draft to a lot of people, but I will give it to you. And so, definitely continue to support him and support his work. Good people doing good things. As far as me, you can follow me on social at Cameron Wolfe. Put that E on the end of the Wolf. That's me on Twitter, and then Cameron D Wolfe on Instagram. That's how you'll find me there, and you'll see him on the NFL Network. I'll actually be, I don't know when this is airing, but Thursday I'll be on TV talking a little bit more Patriots, and so you can catch me there on NFL Network for Path to the Draft. We do one more week of Path to the Draft after the draft, so that'll come on Thursday night. And then, you can kind of check me out on these channels throughout. One other thing I like to pub, I did a podcast with Steve Smith and James Palmer earlier this week. We talked a lot of wide receivers. So, for those people who want to hear more about Jalen Polk and Javon Baker and Steve Smith's view of those players, definitely tune in. We talked a lot of that. I gave my insight, but Steve is a breakdown of receivers. And so he gave a comparison of Jalen Polk to TJ Houshmandzadeh. That's his comp for him. And so you hear a lot about his perspectives of Polk and Baker on that chat as well.
Hope you get some time to yourself as well, man. You are very, very busy.
Oh, I will. It's F1 weekend in Miami, so I'm going to be at the races this weekend.
Hell yeah. Enjoy for the both of us. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again for your time and for the kind words. It means a lot. And thank you all, as always, for watching. Now, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And we will see you next time. Peace.